Okay, hello everybody. Today we are talking about Jetpack Compose, and this is the new UI model that Google is proposing for Android. And Romangi, from whom this picture is one of the leading guys there, and he's also a photographer, and this is part of a watch face that he has created, an analog watch face. And what was interesting, and you can only see slightly of this part here, is that an analog watch face, or an analog watch at all, is created of lots of components. And I thought this is very fitting for what we have to do with, or what we have to deal with in Jetpack Compose, because it's also about lots of components. And we should move to the next screen.
Wolfram, can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add some starting comments because you just started right on.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. That's totally fine. I just want to welcome you all. And as you probably noticed, we will start right on. But before we go to the interesting parts, so Jetpack Compose, I just wanted to say a few words about GDG Wrocław in general, which is organizing this meetup. And in specific, I would like to invite you for our next Android webinar. Some of you probably know that from April this year, we have been organizing Android webinars. So from the very beginning, from the first Hello World application to the most complicated parts, this Android webinar about continuous integration will be our last one. So it will be presented on the next Monday. And also, if you want to see the previous webinars, you can find them on the GDG Wrocław account on YouTube. So I really encourage you to look at them and see what we did there, because I think that there are some really great stuff out there. And okay, so yeah, this is all from me. Back to you, Wolfram. I'm now sharing your screen, so show us what you've got. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome back. So in this talk about Jetpack Compose, it's about creating a user interface made up of lots of small components and ideally many stateless components. And this is from the website of Google, where they present Jetpack Compose. And they say that it's built around composable functions, and that these functions let you define your app's UI programmatically rather than before with XML that we did, and by describing its shape and data dependencies. So this is the important part, that we have small components, we create everything programmatically, and we describe what the UI should look like. And we get rid of most of the XML completely for layouts. Some other parts might still be relevant, for example, strings XML for translation, stuff like that. But for the UI, XML is no longer needed. This is another part of the Compose website, and that is the marketing blurb. So how they present Compose to us developers. And they say that with Compose, we need less code, very likely, because XML is really very verbose. It should be more intuitive. It should accelerate development, and it should be powerful. We should be able to do the same as we have been doing before, or even more than we did before, with the same amount or less amount of work for that. And at the end of the talk, I will get back to this slide and we will see how Google is faring so far. Keep in mind, Jetpack Compose right now is in alpha phase. It's the 8th alpha, and before that, they had tons of previews. It's really in heavy development, and even in alpha, the API is changing a lot. So everything they say here is probably going to improve over time. So let's see let's see some samples. Later on, I'm going to show or going to give a live demo, and you will see more code then. But just to give you a short glimpse of what is coming or what you will have to deal with if you do Compose. So this is the minimal content that you have to do. Set content replaces this set content view where we inflated an XML layout. Now we have this set content, and within this set content, we can write everything, or should call other functions that make up our UI. So in this case, there is this composable. Everything is called composable. Your theme in there that defines the theme of your app. And then content is calling another composable, which actually shows the content of the screen. But you could put everything in here if you like so, but of course you wouldn't do so, and I didn't do so as well. So a very, very simple composable is this, where you only show some text. So we have this text, which represents a text view previously, and you have this attribute text where you say what the text should be, in this case, hello compose. And if you run this, it's at the top left corner of the screen and doesn't look nice. So let's put it in the center of the screen. We wrap the text, modify text with something with a stack. That is something like a frame view that we had previously, a frame layout that we had previously, where you could put things on top of each other. And here we simply add only the text and say that the stack should take up the full screen, and that with the modifier, that the text should be in the center of the screen. And with that, it looks like that. Ooh. Now to a slightly more complex example, we have this component. This is part of a project I'm working on right now. And whenever you slide the slider, the text field should reflect the changes. Also with minus and plus, you should be able to decrease or increase the interest rate in nice steps, say 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and so on. And this component, slightly simplified here, could be something like this. You have a column. A column is something where things are beneath each other. So something starts at the top of the column, and everything you put in there is then put below the previous component. So we have this column, and within this column we have three components. If you go back here, at the top is this label and text field, and at the bottom is the adjustable slider, and we have a spacer. It's just a component to add some space in between, in the middle of those two. So this is how you work with Compose. You just have components made up of other components. You can aggregate them and reuse them. This component, for example, is used multiple times in the app. And so you create it once here and can reuse it in every place there. This is the adjustable slider, the lower part where you have at the left side an icon button with the minus, and on the right side an icon button with the plus, and in between the slider. So that's more or less the magic to Compose, but of course there's a bit more to that. The idea behind that is that we have a functional UI. So Compose, as I already mentioned, is made up of lots of composable functions. Every widget is a function. It's no longer a class as we had before. It's a function, and we call this function, pass everything that is needed into the function, and we get the UI as a result. So as part of the functional UI, Google is striving for small and very specific components. So for example, previously we had an image button, a text button, and the button, actually not the text button was inherited from text view, which really weird. And because of that, it inherited lots of stuff that actually had nothing to do with the button. And here they are striving for really specific buttons for the specific purpose. So button is the normal button that you usually have, a filled button. Then we have an outline button where you just have an outline outside of the button, a text button for something that appears like a link, an icon button, and a floating action button. And no inheritance hierarchy here. So this makes it much easier to recombine them and to maintain those components. So this is easier for Google, but it's also easier for us when we create our own UI. And the idea is the data goes in from the parent component, goes downwards to the child components, and events like a button click are propagated outwards until some parent component picks it up and reacts to that. So what kind of components do we have? We have more than that, but these are the most useful ones. Let's put it like that. Stack, as I mentioned, is comparable to frame layout. Column is for vertical lists. Row is for horizontal lists or for horizontally placed items. Card, as we had for quite some time in material design, a common element. We also have constraint layout. I'm really a big fan of constraint layout in XML. I'm not sure if we use constraint layout that much in Jetpack Compose. I think its importance is going down, but there surely will be cases where it's still important that we have it. And lazy column items and lazy row items are actually lists. Column items is for a vertical list and row items for a horizontal list. And we have obviously simple widgets, buttons. I've already shown the many buttons that we have. Text, also the normal text, but also a text field for entering text. Images, we have a switch to slide on and off. Slider, as you've already seen, we can create a pop-up with the pop-up function. A spacer, you've already also already seen to create a space horizontally or vertically between components, and a divider, for example, in lists to separate different list items. And more complex widgets, okay, a text field, I mentioned it already. The scaffold is very important to create the material appearance of your app, for example, with a action bar, toolbar, and the bottom navigation. And the bottom navigation itself is also obviously a more complex widget. So when we create our own components, they might need state. Not always. Sometimes it's best to pass in what the component needs and to simply emit the events, say a button click, and if something changes because of the button click, the state changes and we get the new state inserted into our component. But sometimes it's also useful to have a state on the component itself. For example, for the text field with a password with this eye on the edge. If you click the eye, everything is visible and you can read the password. If you click it again, everything is masked. And this is something that is a state specific to this component, and no parent component cares about the visibility of the password or not. So in this case, you have a state in your component on your own. So if this state then changes in whatever way, for example, because the user clicked on it, or it changes because the parent called it with a different change, a recomposition of the whole tree below that is done. So everything is recreated, but not really everything. They have some clever algorithms to detect whether really something has to change or has to be redrawn. And only if it has to be redrawn, they actually do that. So if you read about thinking in Compose, that's the title of the tutorial, let's put it like that, on the Android side, you can read more about the optimizations they've done there. They've done quite a lot there. And the state that you have is, it looks like normal Kotlin code, and it kind of is normal Kotlin code, comparable to coroutines. It's normal Kotlin code, but actually, when your code compiles, a lot of compiler magic is used to ensure that this recomposition takes place, for example. So without these compiler magic, it doesn't work. And that's a reason why, if you want to use Compose, you really have to use Kotlin. I don't know any good reason for not using Kotlin, but if you have a good reason for not using Kotlin, then you're in a bit of bad luck and you have to create your UI, for example, in Kotlin, and then do the rest in Java if you really want to stick with that. But you cannot work around this limitation. Let's call it a limitation because it really limits your options, even though Kotlin is really a great language in my opinion. So since state is such an important concept, they had plenty of tries to get it right. And the first one was at model, it was deprecated. Then they had this by state, they deprecated it as again, this one as well. And now they say use remember either while some value equals remember and then the value, or you can use var some value by remember your value. And that's how you create state, and the value returned by remember is fixed unless you pass in, unless a recomposition is needed, this value doesn't change. So if you really need to be able to change this value, you have to use this mutable state of it that you see at the bottom of the slide. So this is how you would do it. If you have an internal state to your component, then you create this state initially and afterwards work with the state. So in this case, it's a mutable state of, since I need to be able to change the current value, for example. So this is showing that what we have with Compose on the right side is pretty similar to what we have with React, or you could also add SwiftUI, or you could add Flutter. All these declarative UI languages are pretty similar, and if you understand one, you probably understand the other quite easily as well. So if you're familiar and you're coming from the web world and have done lots of React projects, Jetpack Compose definitely is the thing for you, and you probably will find it very easy to understand that. So how does Compose internally work? I already mentioned it. The most important part is actually the compiler, the Compose compiler plugin. So when your code compiles, a lot of magic is done, and afterwards your app does what you want it to do, and the state gets updated when you want it to do. And this is done somewhere else in the compilers tab. And this, of course, is done on the left side on your machine where you develop or where you build the system, on your build server, for example. And with Android Studio, you also get help. For example, the preview, or most importantly, the preview is going to support you during the development. And when you create the app and you deliver the app, you deliver all these libraries that you see on the right side. There are plenty more Compose libraries. These are just a few of them. At the bottom, the Compose runtime, this is the thing that cares about the view hierarchy and decides whether a recomposition is necessary, for which components a recomposition is necessary, and so on. And this part doesn't really have to do anything with UI at all. The UI part starts above from that with the core, and then we have foundation and material, and in material are all the components that we are interested in, like the specific material buttons, sliders, switches, and so on. And then the foundation are the layouts and stuff like canvas on. I think canvas is even in core, so where you really can paint on. So that's the tech stack that you're working with. When you have a component, this component must be adapted to certain circumstances. So whether the size is correct, or you want it to have rounded quarters, or things like that. And that is where modifiers come into place. So you have a function, and you can pass in modifiers to the function, and these modifiers play a huge role in how the UI or the component actually looks on the screen. For example, padding, so where it appears in respect to the other components it's bordering on, the size of the component, and where to place the component. And even gesture handling or click handling can be done with modifiers. You will see that later on when I do live coding. This is a simple sample where you see that there is this column, and it uses the maximum width of the parent and the maximum height of the parent. And this is how you combine them. You can use this .then function to combine them. Or you could write it like this. You simply could chain all the modifier functions you want to use. And if you look into the functions, they are actually then using this then function to combine each other. I'm not going into this one here. If you want to test your app, you might want to, or previously you might have used Espresso for UI testing. I'm not a great fan of UI testing. So I usually test my view model logic, but not so much the UI. But if you were used to Espresso and like working with Espresso, then obviously you have to use something new now with Compose. And they have created a specific testing library. I've looked at it, I think about 2 months back, not lately. I haven't used it lately. I've already mentioned I'm not doing much UI testing, but basically what you have here is you have a JUnit rule to create your screen, and then you can do actions and searches on that. And as you can see, the rule is at the top. Then you set a specific content that you want to test on, and at the bottom you say on node with tag, I assert that this node exists in this case. Or in this case, there is a gesture performed on the node, and then again, I expect a certain value to be displayed if I drag the slider to a specific position on the horizontal axis. So this is how you can test your components, and the usual caveat that you should use the robot pattern, for example, applies to Compose as well. But actually, you can start with UI tests right from the beginning. So there's something they have thought of, and they are providing a solution for that right away. Custom views. Yes. Previously, we created custom views often to do something that was rather cumbersome doing in XML, or if we wanted to reuse a certain view many times, like this text field plus slider that you've seen at the beginning. And with Compose, I guess the need for custom views kind of is going to be less than before, because you have these small components that you're combining together, and you should, just by combining them in specific ways, be able to do more than you have been able to do before. But even so, sometimes, say, for example, for a chart component, you need something very specific, then you can use the canvas of the composable that you have and draw directly on the canvas. So you can do a custom view more or less like you did before, with way less code. All this address.xml and stuff like that, you don't need this anymore, which is really a good benefit. So custom views, if you need custom views, are going to be much simpler, surely. So this is a sample for a bar chart. It's not really a bar chart because I'm drawing an arc here. It's more a pie chart, or part of a pie chart. And this is how you could do part of this pie, for example. So the canvas offers all the methods that you know from the normal canvas, apart from draw text. You don't have canvas.drawText. If you need some text, you should put it in the parent component here in the bar chart and place it appropriately. So the tooling that we have is obviously Android Studio, and Android Studio provides us with some ways to create previews of our composables. You see an example here. So at the top, you just give it a name, so which is then displayed. You will see how those previews are displayed very shortly. Then you say whether the background should be drawn or not. And for example, you can say, okay, I want to run it on a certain device, this preview, to see how would it look on a Nexus 5. Okay, a Nexus 5 was always my most favorite device. That's why I still use it in stuff like previews, even though I haven't used it for years in reality. And at the bottom then is how the preview is actually working. And you see here, in this case, I'm using a dark preview with a dark theme equals true. And here you can see that you can use multiple previews at the same time. You just give them different names. The functions obviously must also be named differently. And in this case, I have a light preview and a dark preview. And this is what it looks like. Actually, this is only part of the preview definition. At the bottom is again this Nexus 5 device. That's why it doesn't fit completely on the screen. At the top, I said the width should be 360 and the height should be 320. So you can even size the previews so that if you have multiple previews, they don't take up too many space, for example. Okay. The tooling is kind of a problem, actually. So first of all, you need to use a canary version of Android Studio. So right now it's Arctic Fox, which is the new naming scheme for Android Studio. And it would have been, I don't know, 4.3, I guess. So if you have been on 4.2 previews before, you now have to change to 4.3, which is Arctic Fox, and is now named 2023.1. So since this is a canary version, it's bound to have bugs in it. So, and it indeed has bugs in it. So that's sometimes a problem in that the tooling doesn't work as well as you would like it to work. Then obviously, or not obviously, but that's the way it is. If we want to see a preview of our component, we have to wait for the recompilation. And later on, when I do the live demo, you will see that it's not always that fast or as fast as you would like it to be. And as far as I know, this is better in Flutter and React. In SwiftUI, in my opinion, it's also not that nice. It also needs recompilation and doesn't work this nicely as well. Then with tooling, I'm giving Android trainings as well. And many of my students really like this drag and drop that you can do in the UI editor right now. And you cannot do this with Compose right now. I'm not sure if you ever will be able to use it in Compose, whether it's as useful in Compose as it has been for XML layouts, but you cannot do it right now. You might not be able to do it ever. And at least for people new to Android, I can imagine this to be a further step that takes them longer to learn than what they had before. While I think that in general, Compose is easier to learn, this not being able to drag and drop your UI might be something that deters some users. Okay, I already mentioned recompilation. Then Compose is a big hierarchy of UI elements. And what I really would like to see is a short representation of this hierarchy somewhere. Like we had it in the previous layout editor, where we tried to create as flat hierarchies as possible. Nowadays, because the way things are rendered in Compose, it's actually not an issue at all. There is no exponential payoff that we had with nested hierarchies before. And because of that, we can have deep hierarchies, but then it would be nice to be able to quickly scan some part, some tree somewhere to see this. That at least is my opinion of the tooling. So interoperability is something I actually haven't had the need yet to try out. But if you're on a big project, it's probably a big issue for you. in that you want your custom views, for example, to still work so that you can wrap them in composables, and or that you could use composables that you created somewhere else, especially custom layouts. I already mentioned custom views. I already mentioned how fast you can create them with composables and use them in XML layouts. There are some solutions for that, but the problem is that the mental model between the old components and the new components is not really compatible. And because of that, interoperability probably will always stay a problem and will only work for some components easily, and for others it will be plenty of work, and you really have to think whether it's worth it. So migrating a large existing project might be a problem, actually. Yes, I mentioned that you can use some stuff, but it doesn't fit easily. So, and with this, I'm going outside of this and going to Android Studio, and I create a new project to show a bit of composables here. So this is this Arctic Fox version of Android Studio, and what you should do then is create an empty compose activity. And stream, and let's create this project. So it's not reacting at all. Ah, there it is. Okay. I prefer the project view over the Android view. Actually, I haven't used the Android view at all yet. So I'm not sure if this is really helpful with Compose or not. Previously, I never considered it helpful, so I stick with that one. So if we create, if the activity is created, what you can see here is this set content method here that has replaced the previous set content view. And Gradle sync is still going on, and I hope it's going pretty fast. Kind of fast, as per usual in Gradle. And now it's done. Okay. So then we have this theme that was created for your app, and we have the preview on the right side, and I'm not sure why it's not there yet. Wait a moment. Sometimes it helps closing the activity or the functions or the file that you're editing and reopening it. And as you can see, it's not really turbo fast creating a preview, and it doesn't work at all right now. So that is something. Okay, let's just run it. No problem. Let's see if this is going to change anything. Now, what you see here, okay, so let's talk about it. I have mentioned the content. This is the theme that defines how everything is going to look like. You create the background based on the theme that you're using, and then you're calling the first function, a composable function. Every thing that you want to display on the screen has to be a composable function. So meaning it has to be annotated with this add composable thing. That is telling the compiler, here's something that you need to pick up and do your compiler magic with. Then we see that there is the empty sample is creating something that is deprecated. It's using the wrong text object. We can simply, I'm not sure why it's even slower than previously, as per usual. And now we have to import the correct one. Luckily, the other one is marked strike through. So we know that we have to use this. This actually, whenever you import a component, a composable function, things look like this, pretty long normally. And at the end, you can see which library it is from. You can only see parts of this here. It must be from the material library in this case, and not from the text function from the foundation library. So with this, it should be imported, and the red should very soon, and it's no longer struck soon. So we're calling here another function which simply, again, contains just one more function that displays the text. And now, finally, we have our preview, and as you can see, there's not that much to see. It's just a small text that you can see here. So let me show you something more that has been generated. There's also this folder, this package UI that contains the color definitions. It contains some shapes if you need them. So some rounded shapes in this case. It contains the theme definition for dark and for light themes, and information about typography. So whenever you want a certain certain textile, don't know how to pronounce that, a certain textile, you can define it here and add it and make it available throughout your whole project. So before doing something, let me switch to another project that I just started, and it's also using Compose. And this is the only app that I actually did for myself, or that I published myself. I have 2 or 3 in beta for ages, but this one really has seen the light of Google Play. And I think the last update has been 1 or 2 years ago, and I want to revamp the app completely. And this now, okay, I'm doing it with Compose. And I'm going to recreate this shortly, but what I want to show you is what this app is about. Okay, so I have certain habits, bad habits that I want to get rid of, or certain habits that I want to pick up. And so I have, for example, a goal for running. Okay, 5 times per month is not that much. Let's say I want to go running 10 times per month. And each time I've been running, I can click here and I see how good I'm doing, or how good I've been doing in the past. So for the last 4 months, and this one should be the current month, I've achieved my goals 2 times. I've missed my goal 1 time. And okay, this is only useful for the current month, this yellow. If I'm about to miss the goal this month, then I get this warning in yellow. So this is what the app is should do. And this is how it looks on the start screen in the main activity. But I have this composable, or this component, which is just this one item that you've just seen. And as you can see here, it is in itself a composable function that is made up of other functions. And one thing that I've created myself is another composable success icon that is wrapping in the icon in a specific way to create this kind of icon here. And what you can see here is what I mentioned with these hierarchies. You're getting down a deep hierarchy pretty fast, but since it has this exponential runs of layouts and drawing of layouting, as we had previously with XML layouts, the Compose model, this is no problem. It just goes down the tree once, and that's good. And columns, as I mentioned, is from top to bottom. Then I have this card. I'm just wrapping it to have a bit of spacing at the bottom. There is the spacer here, part of the column. This is where the card ends. Then I create a card. And as you can see, there are some modifiers that I use, and I've already something that is clickable here. And then again, I have another column for this one here, for everything here. And within this column, I have another row that is creating this. So I have this part and this part. And I plan also to have another icon on the left for a category, say sports, everything. If it's a sport activity, it's put here. If it's a bad habit, like, I don't know, drinking too much coffee, drinking too much alcohol, eating too much sweets, whatever, it's going to be some beverage icon or stuff like that. And so you can see that it's not done. So that's why I have this hard-coded text here, but it's made up of smallish components, everything. And now the point is that I wanted to create it, to use it. I want to, as you've seen here, I want to create a list of that. I have already a list, but I want to show you how you would create a list on your own. So let's just create a habits list. So, Kotlin file. And now, yikes, what's going on? So slow. No. Okay, so fun habit list. So with this, I've just created a composable. I have to import it. It doesn't contain anything. So far, so good. Now I want to preview it, and I create this preview annotation. I don't do anything special here. And this preview, again, has to be a composable. List. And then within this preview, I just call this habit list. So if I close it and reopen it, the preview is going to be created. And right now, I'm not sure it shouldn't display anything because this composable actually is empty. So what we need here is a list. Of course, lazy column, lazy column for index. Okay, so there are different lazy columns. Here you pass in the items that you have here, you pass also in the items, but you also get an index. Since I don't have really an object for items right now, I'm just using integers for that, and thus I'm using this for indexed here. Items class and this, and yes, so we have index item. Now I can actually do something, and I can now create, now call my single habit, whatever it was named, single habit item. So I need an item, I pass this item, and it works since, if you look here, go back here, the item is just a type alias for an integer. So let's go back here. And with this, we already should see something if the preview would be working. I don't know why it's not working. So sometimes it's not working for good reason. That is when your build fails. Since I don't have anything red here, I expect my build to work. So I hope that that is not the reason for that. But on other times, yeah, it doesn't work. The last days, it actually worked pretty well, much better than, say, 1 or 2 months ago. What we see around still working, we see nothing. But during the presentation today, it's a bit of a bummer. What you always can do as well, you can actually run the preview on a device, but be careful. So I'm doing that right now. Be careful with that, because yes, it's visible here. But if you forget about that, that's something I did initially. I just clicked here, have seen my preview. And since I did it in the main activity, the preview actually looked quite close to my app, or to what I had created there. And but I was only in the preview. And I was wondering why the app didn't behave properly. And it didn't behave properly because I was just running the preview. So always, if you wonder what is going on, look up here, whether you're just using the preview habit, the preview, or if you're using something proper, your proper app. So let's see if the preview and the device, wait, the device is on the wrong screen. The device doesn't show anything at all. So something is wrong here. I'm not actually sure why, because the single habit item looks good. And I have event handlers here for if this item is clicked or if this plus button at the end is clicked. But I have default values for that, so I don't need to pass anything in for that. So why isn't it showing up? Maybe because I forgot some modifier. I'm not actually sure. But let's that way. So what I'm saying here is that the list should take up all of the screen, which is actually a pretty good idea. At least, or not all of the screen, all of the screen estate that is passed to habit list. In this case, for the preview, it should be all of the screen, but since it can be part of a composable tree, it might be just a part of the screen. But this part of the screen in which it is embedded should be taking up full pace. So as I already mentioned, the preview is slow. It's I think it's starting by itself whenever you save your file, and you can also start it manually. And this is why it's refreshing directly after it has ended. So the preview definitely needs some improvement. Why it isn't working at all right now, this isn't probably nothing to do with Android Studio, but with me, but I don't see the issue right now. What is making the preview not to show an item? Okay, I haven't. I know, of course, because it's an empty list. That is pretty stupid. So hopefully, let's just restart the preview here on the device. Stop the rerun. Hopefully it's running on the device, please. One of both, hopefully, is going to show the proper result pretty soon. Soonish, kind of. So this definitely is the demo lag. It's slow. I mentioned it that it's slow, but it's not that slow normally. I'm not sure why it's that slow right now. Maybe because I'm transmitting video, and this is also costing power of the computer. I'm not sure. So this is slower than normally, so don't be totally disgusted. It is slow, but it's not that slow. But finally, now that I've added 3 items here, we see 3 items here. What we haven't done is connected. So I can click here and nothing is happening anywhere. So what I should do is pass in a listener. And that is what I mentioned initially. You pass in the values. So in this case, int values that I'm not even using. But in the final version of the app, obviously, I'm passing, for example, a habit object or something like that. That contains all the relevant information of the past, how I did in the past, what the name of the item is, how often I have actually contributed to this habit this month. Say I've been running 6 times this month, something like that. And this is what you pass in. And what you get back, kind of, is the events. So when the button is clicked, this plus button here, then, hello, yeah, there it is. If you click this plus button, the parent should be notified that this plus button was clicked, and eventually someone picks up, tells the view model, for example, this plus button was clicked, and the room database is updated with an increased value, for example. So what we do here, we have this on icon clicked like equals, and we get an int in. Sorry. And we simply print them all. As you can see, my computer is pretty slow right now. I guess it has to do with the transmission. And collect item. So that we find it in logcat. And yeah, it should even work with a Prelude. We will see. So it's installing, launching, and still launching. And now we click and we see, okay, it's the clicked item is 4, which is actually this one. This should be 9, and this should be 1. So this is how you combine those and have event handlers. Now, if you see this, you see that there is some stuff missing. So we want to have a toolbar at the top. And what you normally do there is you create a scaffold. And rewrite everything in here with the scaffold. And we have a look at the parameters. I think it's really toolbar. Let's have a look at that. Top bar, okay, top bar. Be gleich. It's not in here. Maybe it's top bar. The new component, top app bar. Okay, that's the name of the component. And with string resource, you can use this strings.xml. Oh, wait. And now something is missing here. The title is here. Modifiers are not really needed. So what? Why is it red? Equals. To do it that way. Okay. Luckily, I've created it somewhere else and have to look at it why it's not displayed correctly. Okay. So it doesn't look right. Similar text. I have to wrap it with a component. Okay. So I need a component here. So slow. The correct one. And it's still not correct. So why is this not correct? Wait. I'm not sure. So let's just copy it. I think it was whole title part. Giving me a hard time here. So, okay, so you should create a top-up bar there. I'm really just copying it for now, because doesn't make sense to look, probably the title, missing parentheses, whatever. Okay, this is making sense. And this is too much. Yes. So now the scaffold you can use. You could also use a bottom bar here. If I show all the parameters, somewhere there should be okay. You can add a floating action bar by default, for example, and somewhere a bottom drawer. I don't know. A drawer you can add, and a bottom. Just believe me, it's somewhere in there. And so with the scaffold, you get the basics for using the material. Yeah. If you want to use a drawer, you can use a scaffold and add the drawer attribute. If you want to use a top bar, you can use a scaffold. And if you're more lucky than I was, you can add the top bar here. And this is how these things work. Just have the component. This is adding stuff for you, and then you add as a content to the scaffold your own components. In this case, we use the list, and within the list, a single habit item. So, and if we go back to our main activity, that was exactly what I've done here. You've seen this before. What I've also added, let's have a look at the time. Yeah, is the possibility to navigate. This is pretty new. I'm not sure exactly when they added it, but now the navigation components have been ported to to support Jetpack Compose. Previously, the navigation always needed fragments. With Jetpack Compose, my opinion is that we do not need fragments anymore. And so they had to find another way to navigate between multiple screens. And in my simplest case here would have the screen with a list and a detail for each of these items. So you create a nav controller here with this remember nav controller, then can use the nav host, pass in the nav controller, say which item should be displayed first. That is the list item. You give it multiple composables, which each have a name, and then you can navigate from one to the other. In this case, if the details were requested, this is as a result of the click on the screen here, then you can navigate to the details. And as you can see here as well, I'm already creating view models. Well, the view models do not do yet anything useful here. It's just for the demo purpose here, and eventually I hope to be able to make this app actually work with Compose. But right now, these view models don't do much, but you can create the view model and pass it into the screen, and then in the screen react to events of components within the screen and call the view model respectively. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I have these composables, these destinations here, these and this, And for each destination, I create a screen. So that's just my way. And as this habit list, basically what I've created here is a simpler version of this habit list screen that I've created here. And you see again, there is a scaffold, in this case an app scaffold that already has the top bar within it. And then again, this lazy column for index for displaying the list. I really think it's a weird name for list view, recycler view, whatever. And then we have the single habit item. And if there's something clicked, I either pass it on to the parent, in this case, on details requested, or I do something within the view model. Right now, I'm not doing something, but if the increase button is clicked, obviously, this should be stored in the database. So this is how you can work with Compose and actually you combine events and pass data downwards. So downwards in this case are the integers, or in the future are the habits, and upwards are the events for whatever has been clicked here. And if we restart the app, hopefully on the device, you should also see the scaffold. Okay, so now we have this toolbar. It's working, as you can see here, working in dark mode and in light mode pretty well. Maybe I should use a different color for this one in dark mode. I have to think about these colors anyway. And so this is how you easily add a top-up bar if you do not make mistakes like I did, and how you could add a drawer or whatever you want. That is common to material design apps. So let me have a look at my cheat sheet. No, I think I can return to the slides now. Okay, so this has been the demo. So one question you might be interested in is Jetpack Compose production ready yet? And this is a quote by Mark Murphy. Not exactly sure when he has said or when he has written this, but I guess it's 1 or 2 months ago. And back then it was only for the most enthusiastic developers. But I don't really agree nowadays. I think it has improved a lot since it has moved to alpha. Now with the addition of navigation components to Compose, it's not really production ready yet, but it's something that you really, really should look into and should familiarize yourself with, so that when it's going to be production ready, that you can quickly move to this model. Because what we're doing right now is with every new layout that we create, with every custom view that we create, with everything XML based that we create right now, we are creating legacy code that we have to maintain way back, and we want to get rid of as soon as possible, because this model has surely many advantages, in my opinion, over the old way. And so the longer we keep using XML layouts, the larger the amount of legacy code that we create. And that's the reason why you should, at least look deeply into Jetpack Compose. And yes, as he's written here, there still are many changes in the API, even though we are no longer in the developer preview, we are in alpha right now. There are still changes in the API. So if you have written something and you open it, say 2 weeks later or a month later, and there have been 2 more releases of Jetpack Compose Alpha, or maybe beta sometime, you surely will have to change things. You will see duplicated stuff in there. They're even generating duplicated stuff if you create an empty compose activity. That just shows how fast everything is. And it also shows that the parts of the Android toolchain, tools and libraries do not completely work together right now, but they will. I'm quite confident, and I gave a version of this talk, I think 2 months ago, and back then I really said, have a look into it, but it's definitely not production ready. Right now, I would say if you start with an app right now and you know that you're going to publish it in, say, 3 or even more months, you really should evaluate at least Compose and check carefully for what is not working right now, and whether you really should create something new that contains legacy code right from the beginning. That's something that you have to think about, in my opinion. So let's come back to the slide. Is it less code? Yes, I think it's less code. Yeah, obviously XML is a very verbose way to represent anything. So less code is pretty easily achieved. Since you cannot drag and drop, you might have to type more code initially than you used to do. But in the long run, I think you will still type less, even if you used to use the UI editor. Is it intuitive? I think that depends. So I really like the XML way to do layout, and I really liked Constraint Layout, and I think it was very powerful, and we could achieve really nice solutions with that. And I'm simply used to this old model. But if you're coming from, say, Flutter, SwiftUI, React, then you're already used to this new style. And I think even though I'm not using it for that long, after all, Jetpack Compose is not that old, I prefer this style nowadays. And this, in my opinion, says or shows that it is intuitive. It still needs to get some getting used to if you're more familiar with XML layout. Will this accelerate development? Right now, no. I would still say no. Preview is too slow. For example, I think the XML layout editor, the preview in the XML layout editor is better than what we have in Android Studio right now with Compose. I mentioned drag and drop that it can, you previously could use for quickly creating prototypes, for example. So in the short run, at least, I would say no. In the long run, I would say yes, because this code is more concise and more expressive. You see the hierarchy there, and you see how the components are made up, and you can more easily understand what is going on. And so if you revisit a certain screen a month down the road, or even worse, 6 months down the road, you're much faster back on track and much faster able to change this code. So in the long run, it will accelerate development. In the short run, I probably will decelerate. Well, slow you down. But I hope that with improved tools, this is going to get better. Is it powerful? Yes, I think with the components that they have already, and the way to create custom components, and the simplified way to combine components, it's a powerful way to create UIs. The trouble is probably if you run into any trouble. That's maybe back to the previous part, accelerate, powerful, maybe they belong together. We had some tools previously to analyze, for example, layouts. So we could use the layout hierarchy tool to see how our layout rendered and which attributes belong to it. And something like this right now is missing for Jetpack Compose. If you do a layout hierarchy right now, you only see the wrapper for Compose in it and nothing else. So if something doesn't work, the tooling is not there yet. So this is probably minus for powerful and for accelerate development combination. But if we consider that we're right now only in the alpha stage and expect improvements to carry on, if not as fast, then at least nearly as fast as in the past, then I guess that this slide is going to see 3 thumbs up and 1 shaky thumb for intuitive, because we all need to get used to it, unless we're coming from the React world. And with that, I'm done, and we can go over and have a look at the slides or your questions.
Yes, I think that we can move on to questions. Thank you, Wolfram, for the great presentation. I can see that we have got some really interesting questions there. So we can start with the first one. Is it possible to use Android Studio tool like Layout Inspector to check out our views created with Jetpack Compose library? And what's the difference under the hood instead inflating layout from the XML?
Okay, these are 2 parts. The first is, can we use Layout Inspector? As I've just mentioned, no, we cannot use the Layout Inspector. We cannot check our views as we have checked them in the past. So that's the bad part. I expect some kind of tooling to be available eventually, but none is there yet. What's the difference under the hood? Actually, I don't know, but I guess they're kind of drawing directly on whatever they are using for that. So they are not using the classical view hierarchy and every composable would turn into a view and then be displayed on the screen. They are drawing directly on, I don't know, on an OpenGL part or whatever. So I don't know exactly what is under the hood, but they are not creating any view hierarchies out of Compose. I hope this answers your question, or at least partially.
Okay, so the next questions, what are the, there are modifiers, for example, for padding, but having a padding composable would also be possible. What is the strategy for deciding whether something should be a composable or a modifier?
That's a really good question. I think they initially even had a padding composable. I'm pretty sure it's no longer there. What is the strategy? I think if it's really just, if your view in itself stays the same and you just want to modify it slightly, then it's a modifier. If you want to wrap it completely, then you would use another composable and put the other composable within it. So I actually with padding, especially, I initially thought padding should be a composable. If you look at the code that I've shown, maybe I can go back a few slides. No, not sure. Sorry. If you look at the code with the modifiers, it kind of disturbs the reading flow of the composables. So this is a problem. I would suggest to use modifiers as sparingly as possible and to use wrapping components or composables as much as possible. Though it looks like the Android team differs from my opinion. Okay.
All right, so let's move to the next question. Is hot reload only available for dummy components, or you always need to recompile to see the preview?
You always need to recompile to see the preview. That's the same with SwiftUI, where you're using Swift for Apple code, and the Swift code has to be compiled. In our case, Kotlin has to be compiled. The compiler plugin has to do at least part of that, and I'm not sure how it's rendered in Android Studio actually, but right now you always need to recompile your project. Also, when it comes to this, I also expect them to optimize this so that only the UI code or only the current file has to be recompiled. Not sure whether that works well with Gradle. I really don't know. But I guess we will be able to see some optimizations there as well, but not right now.
Okay, so the last question, which is a bit tricky, I would say. Why should we be even using Jetpack Compose if we have got Flutter, right? Which has got like really similar UI building tool. What's the benefit?
Yeah, Flutter loses Start. For me, that's nearly enough to use Compose. Now, to be honest, I think Flutter has use cases where it's pretty well attuned to, but for others, for example, if you're really just targeting Android right away, it might be more convenient to stick to Android alone. And I personally prefer Kotlin all the time over Dart. Where I agree with you is that the Android tooling has to learn from Flutter and can improve when it can take a bite from Flutter's tooling, yes. But
okay.
It's both. It's UI. If you really stick to the UI, you could probably use Flutter, but then you would have Dart on the one hand and some things in Kotlin for plugins or stuff like that. I simply happen to prefer Kotlin. That's why I really not into Flutter.
Fair enough. Okay, so that was the last question. I mentioned on the chat that we have got some JetBrains licenses to give for the questions. I believe we have got free license and free people ask the questions. So if you would like to get JetBrains license, just let us know on Facebook or Meetup. We will give you the code so you can have the licenses for really great questions. So yeah, if this is all for you guys, if you have no more questions, we have got one more questions. One more question. Do you have got any experience with Kotlin multi-platform?
Yeah, yes and no. I've just started a project with Kotlin multi-platform. It's a bit tricky, actually. If you really want to consider Kotlin multi-platform, the problems are on the iOS side. And if you want to do that, I strongly recommend to go iOS first. So always so you do say use cases and all the common stuff in your shared module, and when you then switch to the UI, do the iOS part first and check if everything works. Just a version change, minor version change of a library can cause your project not to compile, and these compile problems or these runtime problems on Swift are really hard to spot. And yes, I think Kotlin multi-platform has a lot of potential. And as I've mentioned, I've just started a project where I'm going to use that. As I've just started it, I don't have deep experiences, but I had already some minor problems with iOS. That is why I recommend starting with iOS.
Okay, so I think that we're done with questions. Thank you once again, Wolfram, for the great presentation. It seems like really interesting thing, and probably everyone should at least try Jetpack Compose.
Absolutely.
Okay, so just a finishing word for me. If you like this presentation, you can give us a thumb up, and you can also subscribe to Wtedy Wrocław on YouTube. And once again, if you want to get more content from Wtedy Wrocław, you can like us on Meetup on Facebook, and you can check our previous Android stuff on the YouTube. And that's all. Thank you all, and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.